the 49ers just signed Tony Jefferson, who had been in the league for a couple teams. He was a Raven, and before that he was a Cardinal. Definitely remember him playing against the Niners about 6 years ago. But it seemed like he was a rumor to land in San Francisco for like months. It feels like that's been since March of free agency. He's known as being an amazing teammate. I wrote down astonishing teammate. Aiden, you're a fan of that term. Um, but I think he's going to be the first safety off the bench. He's been mostly a box safety, and I would expect him to be more pushing Marcel Harris for that roster spot. But he's fully capable of coming in and playing the single high safety. He did that in his last year in Baltimore a little bit, but he hasn't played since 2019. He tore his knee in 2019, then he opted out last season. So he played 5 games in 2019. That's where he's last at. So hasn't played a lot of football recently, but I think he's a guy that, while a lot of June signings don't make the roster, I think he's definitely a guy that could make the roster. But what do you think, Aiden? You think he makes the roster, or do you think Marcel Harris and Tarvarius Moore kind of push him out of that spot?
I think it'll be interesting. I think he's a guy who could make the roster. We've signed a couple of veteran safeties. I forget the other safety that we signed, who's in a similar mold to that. I want to say a former Cardinal
Tavon
as
Wilson?
well. Yes, I think that they're kind of in the same boat. Jefferson might be a little bit more talented. He's been in the league a little bit longer, if I'm not mistaken. But Jefferson's a guy who has played for, I think he's still 29, but he's played in the league for 6 or 7 years, started for most of those. He's a guy I could definitely see make the roster, given how nervous every 49er fan is when Marcel Harris is on the field. And he's in a contract year as well. So it's not like you're sacrificing cap flexibility down the road. He's a guy I definitely could see make the roster. I would say Marcel Harris is on the block more than Tarvarius Moore is. That's something that you mentioned before the podcast, which I think is actually pretty interesting given something's got to be going on at practice or in something, because we do not see Tarvarius Moore on the field enough to justify his, I guess, standing on the roster. He must be a special teams beast. But like you said, a lot of June signings don't make the roster. This is a guy who definitely could.
Yeah, and going back to Tarvarius Moore, I was kind of thinking, is he a guy that could potentially get cut? Because not to question his talent, he's a very talented player, but you've heard some stuff about some of the pursuit angles he's taken in the run game, some of the blown coverages he had in the Bills game, and it's just been some questions. He's been on the team long enough where those type of mental mistakes can't really exist, especially when you're the single high safety. You can't have mental errors. That's why Jimmy Ward is such a big deal back there, because yeah, Jimmy Ward might not make a ton of, might not get a ton of interceptions, but he's a very smart player and he's going to play sound. He's going to be a sound defensive back in that single high scheme. So I think for him, I think it's tough to kind of project what he's going to look like. I think for both him and Marcel Harris has definitely had some questionable coverage plays in his past. Namely, you got to go back in 2019 to that Saints game where he was just getting cooked by Jared Cook, I think it was mostly. But Marcel Harris last year got a ton of praise in training camp of coming back looking a lot better in coverage. Maybe he takes another step this year and you kind of see him maybe turn into a full-time safety. So I think, if anything, I think it's good competition. And like I said, Tony Jefferson's a guy that's going to welcome that competition, going to be a really good locker room guy for a young secondary. You talk about Lenore and Thomas. So those two guys in the secondary, I think that helps them a little bit. Hufanga as well. Maybe, it helps him mold into a safety opposed to a linebacker. We talked about we don't really know where he's going to play yet. But overall, I think this signing of Tony Jefferson is a really positive thing. Not going to be a big headline or anything like that, especially since he hasn't played in a while. But I do like the signing. I think it's another good move by John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan to just get a high quality person in the organization, and hopefully, bring some more competition, because you want a lot of competition in training camp. And I think the 49ers are trying to build a really, really strong roster. You've seen them stack up on a lot of veteran players. They really are going all in the next few years, which, even if Lance doesn't start as a rookie, or even if he does, I don't think that really matters. I think they're trying to win this year, whether it's Jimmy or Lance. Um, But in the next few years after that, they're going to try to really win during Trey Lance's rookie contract. So I like all this stacking all these veteran players. And maybe Tony Jefferson is just on this team for training camp or even just this season. But I think that mindset that he's going to bring to these young guys in the secondary is similar to what Richard Sherman does. Maybe not the extent we know how great of an on-field coach Richard Sherman is, but we don't really know if he's coming back. Maybe that'll be our next episode talking about Richard Sherman being back, just stacking up the veteran DBs. But I think overall it's a very good move. But anything else you wanted to add, Eden?
No, I think you hit it on the head. A guy who is only going to make this team better, even if he doesn't stick around long term. But I think good signing and something that people maybe aren't realizing it's as important as it is.